All right. Where are the seats all moved?
The spacing seems odd, huh?
Yeah.
That might be something efficient. I could have written it outside. Movies and stuff when it's
Yeah, maybe.
All right, if we're ready, if everybody ready, we'll just get right into it.
Yes, sir. Oh, I never turned my phone.
Are we on, Noah? Okay. All right, good evening again. It's 7:16 PM on Monday, July 13th, 2026. I'd like to call to order the Village of Brookfield Committee of the Whole meeting. Noah, can we have a roll call for the committee meeting, please?
Trustee Ketchmark?
Here.
Trustee Whitehead?
Here.
Trustee Hendricks?
Here.
Trustee Naramatsu?
Here.
Trustee Gilhooly?
Here.
Trustee Kaluzny is absent. President Garvey?
Here.
And Noah Wright filling in as Deputy Village Clerk.
Thank you, Noah. We have 3 items up for discussion tonight. The first is a discussion of a proposed ordinance imposing a fee for lift assists at nursing homes and assisted living facilities. The village board in the packet is the benefit of a very detailed memo from Matt Dubecker, interim fire chief, but I did want Matt to make an additional presentation, just summarizing what the request is about, where it comes from, and why we need it. So, Matt.
Thank you. So I am here to discuss an ordinance to charge nursing homes and assisted living facilities, beginning with the 7th call. So for clarity, the 1st through the 6th would be free. The fee would be imposed starting with the 7th and moving on as many there were be in that calendar year. The state defines a lift assist as moving someone from their current position to their desired position. Operationally, for us, what that looks like is when someone is on the floor and the nursing home cannot get them up, they call us. When they are on the toilet and the nursing home is unable to provide the staff to get them up, they call us. Earlier this year, they've called us to move residents out of a shower, get them dressed, and then put them in the bed. The Illinois legislature, along with the IML and myself, believe that this is an abuse of emergency responders, that this is not an emergency response. Beyond that, I believe it's an abuse to the citizens of Brookfield. It does not allow myself and my employees to achieve our mission, vision, values, to provide you the service that we are here to do, chiefly to provide an emergency response. If we're on the 3rd floor at Cantata, we cannot effectively respond to a true emergency that might be going on in the village. We also provide services such as training our staff. We train every day. If these services of a non-emergency nature occur, that takes us away from being able to train. We provide public education. We wouldn't be able to do that. It disrupts that. It throws off the timing that we have pre-scheduled with the schools. And finally, fire and life safety inspections. We do a large role with community development, doing those inspections, providing safe businesses for all our citizens to go to. I believe this is an appropriate response to these non-emergent calls going on at the assisted living facilities.
Thank you for the memo and the information and the background. I think, I have some familiarity with this. I know there was times when I was at Cantata with my parents and I hear the calls coming. And I understand why, sometimes Cantata or other facilities might not want to lift someone themselves, but I agree that it's not part of the emergency response and services, and I think that's the purpose behind the state statute. And so is the state statute specifically required that the first 6 lifts can't be charged for?
Yes, the first 6 are free. The statute only allows us to charge beginning with the 7th call in the calendar year.
In a calendar year, right?
That's what I believe it to be.
Yeah. Okay. So that, and I mean, the facilities will be made aware, I know they're aware of the state statute and things like this, so. Questions or comments from the board?
Matt, if you're called to the facility and it turns into, you have to transport them, there is not a charge for that then?
Correct, and the statute does make that clarification, I believe in the third or fourth paragraph of the statute, that once the lift turns into an emergency transport, that the fee is void.
So what do you find is the reason you're being called for these lifts? Do they not have staff? Do they
So-
can't do it?
Correct. It is, when we're speaking about specifically inside the facilities, it is usually a staffing issue. And the call volume does ebb and flow over the years. And we track that and we see what's going on. But typically it is staff related. If they are short-staffed for a few months, our calls increase. They correct the issue, they decrease.
Thanks.
Has there been a dialogue with Cantata and any of the other facilities that would be affected by this if we talk to them yet?
No, we have not had discussion with them. The lift assist issue is not unique to Brookfield.
Yeah.
It is not unique to Illinois. It is not unique to the fire service. Fire service across the nation is being thrust into this, and it's just not in our, it's not an emergency service that we should be providing.
Yeah,
And then it's not an emergency, they're just needing help from the bathroom to bed, floor to bed. So there's been no dialogue.
Yeah, and
Anything.
I'm supportive of the approach. It makes sense. I suspected it was a staffing issue. I know they are facing their own challenges in terms of hiring and retaining workers, right? So I hope that we're just giving them enough notice and information to try to be able to staff up to deal with this issue moving forward. But I imagine we can have those conversations, should this advance.
Absolutely.
I have a question, I'm not sure how to phrase it, but I know that the staff at these locations are probably trained in knowing whether or not they should move somebody who's fallen or, right, or, can't get up. How does that work in those instances where there's like a line where they could do it, but should they do it? When should they call you? Should they just sort of take that risk of being charged for that extra?
So they.
You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Does
they
that make
do
sense?
have, during the day, they do have nurse practitioners on staff that are capable of answering those questions, and they do have on-call personnel.
Okay.
That I know that they have on duty because we get called for transports to the hospital after hours, and they note that they have consulted the on-call nurse practitioner. And so they're there that practitioner is there to make that call. And in the event that we go to the scene and they're requesting us to move them from one place to another, we do our own assessment. And especially in the elderly population, there is a higher instance of brain bleeds due to a fall. So it's in our SOPs that we check that as well. So even if we get there and they just request the move, we're still doing our own assessment as to whether that request is appropriate. And more appropriately, to not leave them if we feel they should be transported.
That makes sense, thank you.
Absolutely.
Matt, it is in the memo, this pertains to the assisted living nursing homes, not to a individual resident asking for help.
Correct, it
But-
is.
But we did something with that over somewhere in recent history with the residents that were repeatedly calling for help to move them, or they couldn't get up.
Not to my knowledge, no. There has been no action on the actual residents or single-family residents, multi-family residents. We've done nothing with that. And
'Cause
we-
there was a couple residents where, there were dozens and dozens of calls.
We do have a list of abusers. We do.
But there's no action we took per se to deal with. I know we had discussion
I
on
thought there was
this.
something with like maybe more of a social worker or something that
Okay.
helped reduce those calls or something like that.
That's an ongoing separate issue.
Okay.
For a discussion for another time.
Right.
but this is focusing just on in the facilities, and beyond Cantata, we do have multiple single-family residents that have been turned into care facilities, the Sequence homes, and they provide skilled nursing that they would fall into this as well, but then again, those people that are there are paying that home for a service.
Right.
And so those are included, even though it may look like a single-family residence, it has been converted to a care facility.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to ask, you said you were tracking it. Do you have a sense of how often or how many times a year this is occurring?
Yes. So specifically, these numbers are just for the Cantata facilities, not for any of the other residents throughout the village. Just looking at 2022, there were 24 calls, 2317, 2413, 8, and just this year alone, there have been 14. So looking at those, chargeable-wise, that would have gained, that's about 27,600 chargeable.
And that's then 14 times this year that you've not been available for emergencies because you've been
Correct.
moving someone.
Inside the facilities, per call, you're typically looking at about 45 minutes. It's not an emergency. We don't drive there with the lights and sirens on typically, given the dispatch nature. Then getting into the facility, up the elevator typically, doing whatever request has been made, then coming back down the elevator, back to the rig, and then disinfecting and cleaning whatever equipment there is. If we had to use a stair chair for that move, the stair chair is disinfected. So about 45 minutes.
This seems very reasonable.
And I mean, those 47 calls that you talk about in the memo, I mean, obviously, these are the ones just where there's not a transport necessary. I mean, I know you go to
Correct.
Cantata a lot more often than these 47 times.
Oh,
And so,
absolutely, and so these calls are just for
Right.
the calls that we're speaking about. We go there for a myriad of other calls, which are just purely transports. There are some calls that are patient assists calls that we cannot leave the patient due to the possibility of head trauma, brain bleed. So, and then that kicks that into our EMS protocol. So then we go down that road too. But these are just the calls that where we went there, we moved them, and then we left.
other questions or comments from the board? Okay, we appreciate you bringing this forward. We'll put it up for the July 27th, or yes, the 27th meeting for a board vote, so.
Thank you for your
Thanks
time.
for the very detailed memo. Okay, moving on to the next item. This is a continued discussion regarding the financing of a Brookfield 25-year street and alley improvement program through a limited rate increase referendum. We've obviously talked about this quite a bit in the beginning in the budget process and other committees of the wholes. We have Finance Director Doug Cooper here. We have a very detailed memo again, and Dan O'Malley from Hancock Engineering. I'll turn it over whoever wants to get started. So Tim wants to get started?
Thank you, President Garvey. At the last village board meeting, we started a presentation on giving you a status update and an initial direction needed to prepare for a referendum coming up this fall, this November. Purpose of the referendum is to potentially raise money for the village to have a dedicated source of funding for our street program, which would not require us to have to go out for bonds every couple of years like we've done in the past and hope that you get them. And if you don't, then we scramble to figure out how we continue to maintain our roads, which would ultimately end up, if we didn't have these funds, ultimately end up having the roads fall into disrepair and will not be able to maintain a reasonably robust road schedule. So we are going to tonight continue that discussion. We're seeking additional board direction on several items. Most importantly, starting with the first thing we're going to get into is the board at your next board meeting needs to adopt an ordinance and actually approve the actual question that will be on the ballot in November. And later in the presentation, Doug will go through two options for you to choose. Really only have two options. And the questions are very strictly governed by the state. And so we need to get board direction as to what ordinance do you want to put on your next agenda for review so that we can recorded by the county and get it on the November ballots. We will talk about that in a few minutes. A trustee reached out to me in the interim period of time in between board meetings and asked for information on if we include an alley program. And as a reminder, we did start discussing, there might be the potential, if the referendum passes, of including a alley improvement program where we would start a long-term but diligent program to pave our alleys. And so we'll have some additional information. Dan from Hancock will have some additional information on that. We will talk about in the alley program, if that is ever created and if the referendum passes, there is a central question we started talking about the last meeting, as if we do this, does the village pay 100%, or, which if the village pays 100% and all things remain equal, we're looking at about a 100-year program by the time all of the alleys are improved. If we ultimately have the village residents pay half the cost, that reduces that year period required to pave all the alleys down to about 50, so it cuts it in half. There are other ways we can try to speed that process along as well. We talked about a little bit last meeting, and be glad to go into detail about that tonight as well. We're going to discuss, if we do create an alley program, how would village, this question came up by the board last time, how would, if we do an alley program, how do we decide what alleys are going to be first, second, third, fourth, and so forth? We'll talk about that. And finally, we will wrap it up with the schedule for what we plan on doing to plan for the referendum in November, mainly involving public education and outreach efforts. So, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug.
Good evening. Okay, so as Tim had stated, we, as staff, met with our municipal advisor, our village attorney, and our bond counsel. We met about early last week, to discuss what the questions would be for the referendum. Bond counsel gave us an example of one, but basically we were allowed under Illinois state statutes to do two types of referendum. So we worked through the process in order to develop these referendum questions, and we came up with two options. One is a limiting rate increase, and the other is what we call the CPI, or the Consumer Price Index override increase. So like I said, the referendum question is defined by state statutes. It's very specific in its wording. There really isn't a lot of leeway on what we can say or do on the referendum question itself, but there's a lot that we can do as far as educating the public as far as what this means. The most important thing I think we need to educate them with is to tell them that the referendum, if approved on either one of these questions, which we'll go into, would allow the village to basically shift property tax allocation from a debt service, which is slowly falling off the roads, to rolls to a permanent type road program. So it would be taking from one bucket and putting into the other. So that basically would be a net effect of zero. So the two that we had chosen were the limiting rate increase and the CPI override increase. And we'll go into the limiting rate increase first. The limiting rate increase, first of all, the limiting rate limits the amount of taxes the village can actually levy for and potential for non-home rules specifically. It's under the property tax extension limitation law, and the limitation tells the village what it can levy, what the maximum amount that it can levy. Every year, if I remember, we always say, well, we're going to levy this much. Well, the county generally rolls it back based on what the limiting rate is. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to raise $2 million for a continued road program. And the first question we were going to ask was, well, let's look at a limiting rate increase question. The limiting rate increase basically says we're going to take our current limiting rate and we want to raise it to this rate, which will give us that $2 million. And under this example here, our current limiting rate under the 2024 levy, because they have not extended the 2025 yet, our current limiting rate is 1.905. In order for us to generate $2 million in additional tax revenue to put towards the road program, we would like our limiting rate to be bumped up to 2.276 cents. And in order to do that, we have to raise or ask for a referendum to increase that by 0.371. So that's what the first question is. the 371 the 371, if you multiply it by our assessed value, that's what's gonna come up with the $2 million. And we would take that money and we would segregate it into a separate fund. We would do it for both of them. So that's what the limiting rate increase basically asks. And this is the question right here. This is the actual question that'll appear on the ballot. And the next part of it, if you're reading your board packet also, there's 3 other portions of it that have to be into the referendum, but they're just part of the whole thing, and that's these. And it's just basically, it's a much more complicated question than it needs to be. But the good thing about it is that the rate or the difference that they're looking at is only showing as 0.371.
And again, we don't have a choice in this matter. If we go with this option for the referendum, and it would start with this, and this would also have to appear on the ballot. Very long. Depending which way the board wants to go, we will review with Metro Strategies, our referendum consultants, to help us understand the best way to communicate this information to the public.
So you'll see that the current rate under that was $10,267,149. That's what we are getting right now by increasing our limiting rate by the 3.71 or the 0.371. We would be able to generate $12,267,000, and there's your $2 million difference. The second question we looked at is the Consumer Price Index override. The Consumer Price Index override is basically saying, okay, under PTEL, the village is allowed to increase its levy from a previous year by 5% or the CPI, whichever is the lowest. Our referendum question would say, okay, well, do we want to take our CPI rate, which is at 5% or the lower, and make that instead a higher rate that's above the law that's currently allowed, above PTEL regulations? And we determined that what we would like to do is to raise our current CPI rate from the 1.905, I'm sorry, our limiting rate from the 1.905, we'd like to raise that to 2.276, and that increase is actually 19.46%, which is greatly above the 5% or the lower the CPI, which is allowed under statutes. So we would put that on the ballot and basically say, do you want to increase the CPI to 19.6%? And that's this question. So then we went through, after our discussion, we were talking about and this is the question here. And also notice on both questions, they do ask for the value, how it would affect a $100,000 home. That's specific to the state statutes. They specifically say it's a $100,000 market value home. How much would that affect the taxpayer? What it doesn't say, unfortunately, is that we're going to use this money for a road program, and the $100,000, the $112.45 is actually being shifted from a debt service levy over to a general levy, and that's how we're going to get our money to help fund our road program. So we went back and forth on several pros and cons. For the limiting rate increase, the pro, of course, is the number that shows up on there, that 0.371 isn't quite as intimidating as a 19.46% increase. If I'm a voter, I might look at that and be like, what is 19.46? But I wouldn't know or wouldn't understand or wouldn't realize that 0.371 is the same thing except in a different way. The con, of course, is that it's a much more in-depth question. And you have the voting question, and then you have 3 subparts, which are basically on the next slide here. Oh, I'm sorry, it was on the previous slide, but they're just very convoluted, and it's just a lot of words, and that might be more intimidating than a 19.46% increase. So those were those. In the CPI override, the question is the pro is basically Riverside went through the same issue in 2024, and they modeled their referendum as a CPI override, and that referendum did pass because it's a much easier question to look at in the polling in the booth, and they also had a large education campaign to educate the voters about what this really was all about and how it wasn't going to affect their property taxes. It's just shifting from one bucket to another. And like I said, the question is it's less complex than the than the limiting rate one. The con, of course, is that you're gonna see that 19.46% increase they're asking for. So like I said here, option 1 and 2 do provide the same result. They both work towards getting us at $2 million. We've had some concerns about what happens in the following year. So what essentially will happen is that $2 million levy will be actually the $12 million, because we're bumping up to 12 million from 10. That will be our new base for going forward. That will be the new base that our subsequent property taxes are based on. So we're always going to maintain that $2 million within the upcoming levies. And we can segregate that $2 million into a separate fund like I had talked about before. And I'm sure that we could work out some type of an ordinance that would say the excess above what we had done previous to the referendum will now be put into a infrastructure fund to support the roads. I think that's very possible to do that. I think actually that, I want to say Riverside did that. I think in reading the material, I thought that they had done some type of a referendum on that. Not a referendum, a resolution. And so that's about all I have. I'm going to hand it off.
If I may, Tim explained that there were several items for this to discuss, and I think we might need to really resolve this question first, because this is kind of, we need to, if we're going to place this on the ballot, we need to take action at the July 27th meeting. Some of the other items talked about are more policy decisions about what we would do if the referendum passed, and alley funding programs and cost sharing and things like this. But this is a threshold question that if we're going to put it on the ballot, we have to make a choice between these two. So I think we should maybe kind of work towards building a consensus or get board opinions on the various questions first before we move on to the other topics. Does that make sense? Or? Okay, so, and Doug, just to take a step back, the big picture, we've done things differently over the years. We sold bonds, was it 2005 or when did we start the bond? Did we get the approval for the bonds?
Well, the road referendum
Yes,
bonds that we
yeah.
just did, that was 2016 was the first referendum that
Right.
I've been here for.
And that was, what was the dollar amount on that?
It was $22 million split up into 3 different issuances.
And, you know, at the time, the voters did approve that, and we did follow through and did what we said, but I always lose track of the figure out of that 22. How much did we pay in interest on those bonds?
I think I calculated it to be, I can't remember now, but I want to say it was, I want to say 5 million.
Okay.
I know the total, I think the total bond issuance cost as well as the interest over the 10 years for each issuance was about 5 million total.
And at the time, that's what we needed to do, but a lot of that money went towards the bond issuance costs, which you can't avoid. Those are, we have to
Right.
put the bonds out for sale, and there's bond consultants and then the interest. But we've moved towards this idea going forward to avoid the interest costs, so the money that we actually levy goes directly to streets, so we're not paying for interest and bond fees. Is that
That's correct.
Okay. And then, you know, in terms of the, you know, I'm glad you included what the Riverside did. We like to look at what neighboring communities do in their education campaigns and things, so I'll open it up to board questions or comments or discussions or preferences on option 1 or option 2, or.
I have a question. So just to clarify what you said, that is the language we would put in the referendum, and there will be no context in terms of what that money would be used for. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then for the first option, option A, there are 3 parts you said, right? But there's only one vote, right? There's one check mark.
Yeah, so I don't know if Adam wants to play into this part or not.
Correct, yes. There's only one question for either option A or B that you choose, that the voters either vote yes or no. But the supplemental information is not a question for them to vote on. It's actually information to the voter, information that's strictly dictated by statute. What you have to provide is supplemental information that's going to be listed below the question, one question, yes or no.
Okay.
And just to be clear, I think this is clear, I think Doug made it clear, it's, the language about it to be used for streets not be included is not at our request. That's the state statute requires that the language be this, and it doesn't allow us to put any additional language about what this would be used for. So that's part of, you know, the education campaign, and if there is an opportunity to do a resolution or ordinance, if it passes, about what it would go for, but we can't add the language as much as we'd want to. We all I think, it's clear what the intention would be if this were to pass, what the money would go for, but the state statutes unfortunately don't allow us to put that language in there.
Yeah, I think we all agree, regardless of which option we choose here, the public education campaign is going to be critical for residents to be able to understand what they're voting on, right? And in some ways, I think that's the most important aspect of this whole question, and I appreciate that staff and the consultant team are already working towards that goal. That being said, we are limited by the state statute in terms of these two imperfect options. My initial reaction is that 19.4% number does jump out in that description. So with that option is concerning to me in terms of giving people the wrong impression about how this is going to impact their household. I recognize the challenges with option one in terms of the length and complexity of the kind of ABC structure. But I think the intro to that option is a little bit more clear. I don't want to say I love it from a communications perspective, but I think of the two options, I'm leaning towards option one.
I agree with Trustee Whitehead.
I'm leaning that way as well. I do think it's kind of a shocker when you see the 19 point. I understand it's the same either way you look at it, but yeah, there's a little bit of a shock value there.
Can you talk about how Riverside messaged? Do we have any background on that?
Yeah, I mean, when we first started talking about this referendum, we did meet with the Village of Riverside. We met with the village manager and their attorney, and we talked about everything that they had done to educate the public, and they gave us a whole bunch of information. We've been looking at it. It's still online. We can pull it up in their board packets. We can pull it up in their referendum FAQs, and that's kind of how we would go. I mean, it really, if you look at what their material says, it does say several times that public education is a key component to passing this referendum. They had gone for a straight street and bond referendum, and like I said, they chose that second option, option B.
Was it a similar percentage increase?
No, it was lower. It was lower. I think if somebody said it was 9% or something to that effect.
But they had the same choice about the basic language. I mean, option A was comparable language to option B. I was just curious as to why they chose, and I think you did a good job of laying out the options, the pros and cons. I mean, I agree with several board members that 19% figure jumps out, and would have to be a strong education campaign, but I'm just curious why Riverside chose that option, and they were successful with it, so.
I honestly don't know. I
Okay.
mean, I can't even guess as to why they did not. They may have looked at the second one, but they probably decided also, for the same reasons that we were kind of looking at, there's only 9%, and this is a much more, option A is just a much more complicated question.
Right, when you're talking
You
about
have to
this-
actually sit down and read it.
When you're talking about the CPI and inflation, 9%, it's high, but it doesn't, I don't think it has the same, it doesn't jump out at you the same as a 19% number, right? As in, people don't think about 19% and CPI in the same category.
I would support option one for the same reason that 19%, that's gonna be hard to overcome.
I think there's a clear consensus on the board that option one, or I guess it's option one, up there was option A in the packet, I think, but.
I tried to make them consistent. I started option A, and then I changed to option one,
Okay.
so I may have missed changing them over. I apologize for that.
So we're talking about the limit, we approved that we support the limiting rate increase language as opposed to the CPI override increase language. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so we can now move on to the additional, I mean, and the reason I did it this way is this is a threshold decision that we have to make, and it has to be July 27th. These other items are part of the education campaign and policy decisions going forward. Well, I'm not saying we, can't decide on these things tonight. They don't necessarily have to be decided tonight, but the education campaign can't really progress too much until these other decisions are made, so. Okay. So if we want to move on to the next step,
Yes, so as Tim mentioned earlier, after the last presentation, we got some questions, a little bit more about the green alleys, how they're constructed, and kind of along the lines of the education campaign. I just wanted to present a little bit more information. So this slide was on the last presentation, just kind of shows the magnitude of the issue. As I've mentioned, we've got about 22 miles of stone and asphalt alleys that will need to be replaced as part of this program. Total estimated improvement cost of $114 million. And as a reminder, the proposed improvement would be a green alley construction, so permeable pavers. Not only would it cut down on the maintenance that DPW is just continuing to do year in and year out, but it would also provide two significant benefits. The first being that it would provide stormwater management, storage underneath the pavement itself, which would mitigate some of the flooding that we experience around these alleys, as well as the flow that goes into the undersized combined sewer system. And then the second major benefit would be that it opens up access to additional grant funding, would allow us to use and leverage some additional outside funding sources to try to get that $114 million figure down from the village standpoint. So the main source would be the MWRD Green Infrastructure Grant that we've talked about, that we believe there's a lot of opportunity to get funding for. They've reached out to us, have asked why Brookfield doesn't apply, and we think that that's something that we could take advantage of. So, and then I just wanted to put some pictures just to get a better understanding of what exactly this looks like. This is a picture of the last green alley that we installed in 2018. You can see the typical section on the right there. That's what's in the plans. There's a large aggregate storage volume below. And so you can see on the left, that's the kind of during construction picture. You've got two concrete sections on the right and then on the left, about 5 feet wide. It's a 14-foot wide alley pavement, and then in the middle we put the permeable brick down the center, and the water flows into that permeable brick section and then down into that storage volume. So that's what holds the runoff, and that gets sized. The depth of that we would calculate based on the tributary area to that alley, and that holds the water rather than it going straight into the combined sewer system. So, and then that's kind of a little bit of a before and after. It's not the same alley, but on the left is a picture of one of the poorer alleys in town, but not something that you don't see, throughout town. That's not, cherry picked really. You see that a lot after a rain event. And then on the right is what the finished product looks like. You can see in that middle picture, the brick getting installed in that middle section. And then on the very right, that's the finished product with the permeable brick pavers down the center. So, any questions on green alleys before I continue?
Is there a difference in useful life between a green alley and a regular full concrete alley?
Yeah, it's a good question. We have not found a significant difference. There is some maintenance that's involved with the green alley. Every 10 to 15 years is, I think, what we've seen. You need to come in. There's screenings in between the bricks, so you have to clean that out so that the water can infiltrate in through the brick paver or the permeable pavers and into that aggregate volume. But the goal would be that we get a full 100-year lifetime out of these pavements, and stay up to date with this maintenance so that they're not turning impervious like our stone alleys are, and the water's not getting in, because that would defeat the purpose of putting the green alleys in. But the goal would be to get a 100-year lifetime out of these alleys.
Okay. Other questions from the board on the green alley concept? Okay.
So again, this is some background from the last discussion that we had. This goes into the two options that we discussed. The first being the fully funded through the referendum. So using the $800,000 annual amount that we think that would be generated through passing the referendum to be allocated towards this and not having a resident cost share. As you can see, we've got some TIF funding, some MWRD funding. We think these costs are conservative, but realistic, and that would yield a program length of 99 years. It's a long time, and I've got the note at the bottom. If we were to pass a roadway and bridge levy in the future, that would generate an additional $500,000 a year. That could decrease the term to 69 years, which would be helpful. Again, still a long time, but this is what we would get with option one, with no resident cost share. And then the second option that we discussed was a 50-50 cost split. So if the village puts in $800,000 a year, the residents, whoever's alley is being improved, matching that cost, so an additional $800,000 a year, that significantly decreases the program length down to 58 years rather than 99. As I mentioned 2 weeks ago, we do have the additional cost component there through by the additional costs incurred through the special assessment process, and that would be that would increase the total program cost from 114 to 133 million. You know, the big pro in this situation obviously is the lower program length. The cons would be you have some additional legal and admin costs associated with the special assessment, and again, the residents are still, you know, they're approving a referendum that's increasing taxes. As Doug mentioned, it's, you know, kind of canceling out with the bonds coming off, but still, and then they're also paying again for alleys. So, and then here's the side by side. You can see the program length at the bottom. Option one being village referendum funded. Option two being a 50-50 cost split. And then again, I included the road and bridge fund. That would be something that you know, we'd like to come back in whenever that is in the future, and if we can leverage that funding, it makes it start to look a little, you know, going from 99 years on one option to potentially as low as 40 on the second option with the additional funding. I think that, you know, you reasonably can start to expect to see, you know, you're not waiting 100 years to get your alley improved. It's a little more realistic timeline, so.
With option two, with the special assessment process, I mean, we haven't done by that method in quite a while, but is it the similar type thing of, you know, someone's got to spread the roll and distribute the cost per benefit to the homeowner? So not everyone on a block is going to have the same increase or assessment, which could result in higher dollar figures to people who have more. Like my past experience has been that the way the roll is spread, it's kind of the benefit to the property, and if the corner properties don't necessarily have like driveway alley access, they still have some benefit from the alley. Everyone has benefit to an alley, even if they say they never use it, because, you know, garbage pickup is done there, police and fire use the alley, so there's no property that has no benefit from the alleys. But in the past, I think we've had decreased assessments for corner lots that have driveways that enter, you know, that exit onto the side street, houses where they have a driveway that exits to the street as opposed to the alley, no garage entrance, that type of thing. But that would be a similar process, correct?
Yes, it'd be the same process as the 20 or so alleys that have been improved since 2000, where they would spread the roll, make adjustments. I think typically, in the example that you're talking about, if the driveway goes off of the street and not the alley, I think it's, you know, like 50% adjustment. Or if you're on the T and you have a right-of-way on both sides, you know, they don't get charged for the full frontage. So
Right.
adjustments get made as part of that process.
But I mean, the cost of that process is, I mean, because for that reason, because the cost of spreading the roll and the legal fees for the assessment and engineering, I guess.
What does the education process to approve the referendum look like in terms of the alley portion? I mean, how much of the alley portion is going to be laid out with that?
I think that would be a pretty big portion of the education process, because talking with Metro Strategies, the consultant that's providing support on this, they do feel that kind of giving that sweetener, I guess you would call it, is important, showing that benefit that would go in there. So providing additional background on the alley financing or I guess the alley inclusion into this cost, I think would be a significant portion of.
But you, somewhere in here, I know there was some numbers we had. I mean, what percentage of the residents don't have alleys? You know, I mean, that plays into this too, right? If you don't have an alley and we're making the pitch for this alley program, do they care? Maybe they do care because it's costing them too. You know, that's why I don't, you know, it's kind of interesting how we work this into it and how much in detail we figure out the program ahead of time.
Yeah, it's a good question, and and that's why we're coming with this again, because it's an important part of this education campaign. Residents need to know, you know, are the alleys just being included as part of this referendum? Are they still gonna have some cost? I think Trustee Niramatsu brought up a good point at the last discussion where, she said, well, the roadways benefit everyone, and that's just all being paid for on part of this referendum, but the alleys don't benefit everyone, like you said. So is it better to do a cost share because you're getting a partial benefit, but it's not benefiting everyone? It's more of an individual benefit. So that's why we're looking for some direction on one versus the other and trying to have that discussion so that we can communicate to everyone, is it fully paid for or is it a cost share, and what they can expect and to be able to vote. So.
And kind of building off of Trustee Ketchmark's point, I think whichever option we choose here, I think the public education is going to be, again, critical and potentially challenging given how long both timelines are at this stage of the process, right? So we're talking about it as a sweetener, but then are we giving people the expectation that their alley is going to be fixed within a few years, right? I mean, they need to be able to really dig into the education materials and understand what will be a lengthy process unless we were quickly successful in securing a massive amount of additional funding, right? So, I am a bit concerned about if we were to take either of these approaches. A resident, votes in favor of this because of the alley sweetener, and they're, that's great. I have a new alley coming soon. And then we do the analysis, and their alley's coming in 47 years, in 67 years, in 80 years, right? So, and then they're not going to see themselves benefiting from that investment. So I understand the intent here in terms of establishing a program, seeking additional funding, and searching for every opportunity to shrink that timeline. But all those program lengths, even the ones where we are trying to be hopeful, are really long, and I think much longer than households think in terms of planning ahead, right? Am I even going to be in this home in 40 years? Probably not for most people, right? So I think the public education around that will be difficult.
I think it always, I mean, I agree completely with the point, but I think it always is any referendum question, because for any referendum to pass, some of the people that voted to pass the referendum in 2016, it passed, and many of those people were senior citizens that voted for it that had to realize they might not be around in 10, 15, 20 years, that they're paying for streets, and that there might be selling or the number of people. So I think we're on the same page that it is part of the education campaign, and sometimes it's people seeing the bigger picture or the long term of this is an improvement for, I mean, it is the most common topic we get for service requests and complaints about the conditions of the alley, and as far as we go with so many other improvements, it's the thing we hear most about. So I think it does seem overwhelming, the time frame seems overwhelming, but just the little bit of information that's been shared about this through the newspaper stories and social media, there was the type of comments that you would expect, but there's also some people, large percentage of people that said, okay, it's a slow process, but we got to start doing it somewhere, and yes, we got to move forward. So I think with an education campaign, people will see and maybe not just vote with, is it going to benefit me this year or next year? Because one of the next steps, if we do decide to go forward some program, is talking about how the alleys would be chosen for the process. Is it an engineering study where it's the engineers determine the alleys that are in the worst shape, or is it based on, if it's a cost share, if there's a special assessment process and there's a clear blocks of support where we're willing to take on the special assessment in our share? That's kind of the next question after this, but I'm concerns about the ability to pass it, but I do, based on past experience, I think people can be educated and understand and think beyond just the next few years.
My concern about the outreach is maybe more that maybe it needs to be focused more on the streets that are definitely going to be benefiting everyone. I'm concerned that people who are voting because of this alley sweetener may not just expect it to be within a shorter time frame. That we can make clear, but then the special assessment, we're telling them that they may get alleys, but the process is going to be pretty much the same as it is now. You have to get all of your neighbors together, and everybody has to be willing to pay additionally for it. I think that, for me, would be the hard sell, and that, for me, would be the source of frustration. Voting for this because I see alleys in the future, and then it's essentially the same process, and the residents are being asked to then pay for that. The special assessment is a hard idea for me to get over in this case.
Is it, would it be the same way where you'd have to, I mean, you'd get 51% of the residents that would agree with it, or is it something we automatically impose?
And that would depend on which cost option you go with, so.
Well, if you go with a cost-sharing option.
Sure.
But is it still alley by alley going for a vote for 51% that want to?
That would likely be how we would prioritize which alley gets done first, is if you're on board and ready to go, you go on a list and then go by a first come, first served basis, knowing that those residents at that alley are on board and are willing to pay for that 50% cost share.
It seems a lot of the last alleys that came forward were turned down because there weren't 51% of the people.
Right, they couldn't get that.
I think it's willing or able.
Yeah, and a lot of them reference the cost. So
Right.
the idea here would be that by
The cost.
matching the cost and going to 50%, that maybe that would entice them to.
Could-
Yeah, and I think that's what I wanted to clarify. The process, that'd be part of it is different than in the past, and it is gonna cause the people who did special assessments under the previous process, they basically paid for, let's say, 80% of the alley was spread among the residents because the village as a whole picked up the legal and engineering. In the cost-sharing method proposed, I mean, we'd be talking like a 50-50 split, so they would be paying for an increase on their, if they pass the referendum increase, and they would be paying towards their alley, but it would be 50% of the project instead of 80% of the project, and that would be more beneficial to them, but it's also gonna tick off the people that paid 80%, and we have to realize that whenever you change a program or change the system, and there'll be people that will come forward and ask, well, am I gonna get reimbursed for the alley I paid 80% for? And we know we're not going to be able to do that, and we won't do that, so.
Is there a threshold question for the trustees as to whether they want to include this in the referendum?
Yeah, we don't have to include alleys at all. There is no alley option, we just threw that in this.
Right.
I'm just hearing some hesitation, so wanted to clarify.
Yeah, I do have some hesitation on that question. I mean, I think we do have other capital priorities in the village. I mean, the community center where we just completed a feasibility study is just one example. But if we do include the alleys, I feel like the cost share, maintaining a cost share is critical. One, I think it makes the timeline, though still challenging, a little bit more tangible. We're not talking about a 99-year timeline, which sounds pretty ridiculous. And then two, it is a important investment. I understand it is a top issue for many residents. My alley's in pretty terrible condition. But it is largely a cosmetic improvement. Now, there are costs to maintenance, but, you know, it's not, I think, something like where the lead pipe replacement, where we're covering 100% of the cost, and because it's a public health issue, and we're facing a mandate from the federal government to replace that within a set period of time, right? It's because this is largely cosmetic and linked to people's property values. I feel it's important to maintain a cost share. I mean, I would even consider if we go this route, like, do we need to go all the way to 50, we feel, to make could you go from 20 to 40, and would that make a significant difference? But those are just my thoughts in terms of option 1 versus option 2.
I'd be careful when you call it largely cosmetic, because it does address some stormwater issues, which are big issues in this town.
Yeah, and part of the reason why we came up and made this presentation at the last meeting was it's consistently, as Tim has mentioned previously, the largest complaint from residents throughout the village. From the last meeting, it seemed like there was support from the trustees. If you guys would like some different options or some more information, just to answer your question about the cost split and why 50, the lower you go, the more that it because there's a cost increase, the 114 to the 133. If you go less than 50, it starts to it not be worth that additional cost.
Right.
So 50 was where we started. You can move that. We didn't really think 75 made sense too, because then, you know, you're not going to get the support. So 50 was kind of that middle ground, but we're not locked into that. So
I struggle with the, like, prioritizing, and the way that it is now is essentially, if you want it and you can afford it, then you can, you know, can maybe convince enough of your neighbors to go move forward with it, but it doesn't mean that the worst alleys are being addressed, right? And they'll just continue to get worse and worse, so I don't know the answer to that.
And I think I mean, the process doesn't necessarily just have to be first come, like the first special assessment. Even if there's cost sharing, there's going to be certain opportunities, because the TIF funding, I mean, we're talking about using TIF funding in some areas, but we don't have TIFs village-wide. The TIF funds could only be used to improve alleys within the TIF. So I could see, you know, we do have a significant, there's a lot of alleys that border commercial and residential that, as part of redevelopment projects and TIF projects, those alleys might come forward first, because there's something going on in that area. If we redevelop an area where there's a new business coming in, and maybe we can make that part of the redevelopment agreement, there could be a contribution there, and those alleys could move towards the top, where you get more of a match from an outside source, and TIF funding would be available, and you do it that way. And then it could be up to the board, and, you know, to decide what the policy is on the order. You know, we could have what we've done with the streets and engineering study, and, you know, you're familiar with the street ratings, you know, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We could do that type of thing. I have a feeling that a lot of the alleys will be in a similar rating, you know, going forward. But I kind of agree with the thought that cost sharing has to be a part of it, because for any chance for it to pass, there are enough residents who have paid for some alley improvements and paid 80% and stuff. I mean, if there's no cost sharing going forward, I think it's kind of a hybrid compromise where they're not the new alleys paved under a cost sharing aren't going to pay as much as the previous ones, but they are going to pay something, as opposed to the people who paid 80% for their alley. You're asking them to vote to pay for alleys completely 100% with some of their own funds, and then there's, you know, the people who have no alleys, you know, that type of thing. But I agree with Trustee Hendrick's point. It's more than cosmetic. There is drainage issues. There's property damage issues. There's the public works time, the public works commitment, manpower equipment. You know, we're not going to all of a sudden stop maintaining alleys, but eventually that would be the goal down the road, where there would be cost savings there and property value. So I understand your point, Trustee White, but I think it's more than cosmetic. It doesn't rise to the level of lead service replacement, but I think it goes beyond cosmetic.
And I think the education and the answer to the points you just made about, some people have already done their alleys, or, you know, whatever, they've already paid, and or they don't have an alley. It's just that this project is for the greater good, right? Across, village-wide.
Yeah, and to touch on a couple of the points that you made. So, for that one, even the people that have had their alleys done, there was a cost share involved. So it's not like this is a new process. It's just a different amount. So, you know, it's not, there's already a precedent of the village helping out, or, you know, having some type of cost share. And it's a little bit different here, but.
And even just, and not to interrupt, but it's not just the village, it was the village's funds or the residents' funds, so all the other, like, if someone got their alley paved where the residents paid 80% of it, the rest of the village taxpayers paid 20% of it. To say it was the village, I understand your point, but it was really, the funds given from other residents, so anyone who didn't get their alley done paid 20% towards the alleys that did get done, so I think that's an
Yes.
important explanation.
Yeah, and for the TIF costs, same with the MWD costs, these are just projections. It doesn't mean, obviously, that, you know, if you're not in a TIF district, you're not, that's not gonna be the funds that we leverage for those alleys. These are just projections based on what we think that we realistically could, leverage. And then to the condition point, the condition for the alleys is very tough. I could tell you right now which streets are worst in the village, which, you know, which areas. With the alleys, if we were to ask Public Works, what are the worst alleys? It's just gonna be whichever alleys were graded, you know, the longest time ago. You know, we improve them by grading them, and then they deteriorate. And that's part of the issue, is that it's just an ongoing process. So when you start talking about how to prioritize, it's not as easy as just doing a street survey. That's why we would probably look towards, well, you know, those that are the most interested probably should come first, because they're ready to go, they're ready to participate in that cost share, as opposed to as much. And maybe that's where you go once you've exhausted that list. Okay, are there any, you know, alleys that we just continue to see issues pop up? That might be the next step there, but just to put that out there. That's why we were thinking along the petition route as opposed to the condition, like you would with streets.
But can the process be flexible enough that if we get a grant or you know, the MWRD grants, I don't think they're restricted to specific locations, but if there's I go back to a redevelopment project, a large block on Ogden redevelops, and as part of that, we require the developer and a part of redevelopment to contribute towards the alley, maybe not pay for the entire alley because it benefits other properties, but could that alley be prioritized because we have a match there? And, or if there's, I know CDBG funding is often based on, we don't have a lot of areas that currently qualify for the economic, you know, areas for CDBG, but if there was CDBG money or other money that was available from other agencies that was available for a specific region or area, could we, I mean, there's enough flexibility where we could, I mean, let's face it, we have plenty of alleys to do. It's gonna take years to just even pick which ones we do. Is there that flexibility there where we don't necessarily have to decide on the final process for choosing the alleys right now, but explain that it'd be a different kind of analysis going forward?
Correct, and if you want to go to the next slide, we can talk about the prioritization. So based on, and I think we're talking about like with the resident cost split, how you would determine the priority. This is kind of working, if the referendum passed, we would, you know, work with staff and the board to come up with a policy for how you determine this. But the thought was that, you know, the first priority would be any high priorities based on the type of use, if you're getting outside funding, or any special factors. If we get a specific, like we just applied for a community project funding grant for the alleys along Grand Boulevard in the downtown area. If we got that grant, that goes right to the front, because anytime that you can leverage outside funding, I think everyone would agree, the village isn't paying for it, take the money and make that improvement and cut into that $114 million. That's the highest priority. Then once you've exhausted that, or if a developer's coming in and willing to share some cost, or, you know, any of those special circumstances, that's when you start talking about, okay, well, you know, during that time, we've been collecting petitions, and we've already got 7 alleys that are ready to go that people, you know, are on board with. Let's start going down the list and getting some of those residential alleys when we don't have the outside funding for other, special circumstances. And then after those have been exhausted, then what's the next criteria? Do we go based on condition? Are they ready to share that cost? Do you force a special assessment, kind of like what Kit talked about earlier? That's where we would define that policy further once that, if that passed, I should say.
I like the cost sharing, I think like most of the other trustees, but I'm curious if there's a potential to have some sort of financial assistance included in prioritizing, and, if your neighbors get 51%, but you're maybe not in that 51% and can't afford the special assessment, like how do we address those issues? Is that something that happens now? I don't know.
Not typically in the past. I mean, that 51% rule, it's not even a rule, it's not a statute, it's a policy that the boards have done in the past, that because we had so few alleys coming forward, we kind of set that 51% threshold. And there was different, even the analysis of how you calculated 51%, is it 51% of the number of property owners, is it 51% as the frontage foot? There was always like talk and analysis about that. So the 51% is just a board policy. And I think it's clear we don't need the 51%. We can impose a special assessment even if there was 0%. But we haven't been doing that, and I don't think we would do that. If we were close to 50% or 51%, we would have to do it. And then, in response to your question, if there was people unable to, or it's based on financial need, there's no source of funding to pick it up other than the other people on the block would pay more, or the village as a whole with other taxpayer money would have to pay for more. So, we've had these cases in the past where alleys passed with, 53% to 47%, and it's imposed, and there would still be the same ability under the special assessment like we do, where you could pay it off over 10 years, that type of thing. There is a finance cost to paying it off. Some people chose to pay the special assessment cost all at once. Some people financed it over 10 years and pay the interest, and if not, they make it as part of the sale of the homes. Someone's got to pay it off before they sell the home, that type of thing. But I don't see, to say, is there a fund available to subsidize people that can't afford the special assessment? It would just be either put it on the other property owners on the block, or the village as a whole would have to pick it up.
But it is linked to the value and size of the property, right, in terms of how much their bill is impacted. So if there's a lower value home or property that's on that block, they're paying less, or they're paying the same amount as everybody else on
I
that
don't
block?
think it's by the value
No?
of the home.
It wouldn't be if you have a double lot, you would pay more.
Yes.
Oh, so just the
Right.
lot
Frontage,
size?
the
Frontage.
It's just the lot size?
Well, it's a combination of the frontage, but also, I think Dan mentioned the example, if you have
The location, yeah.
If you have a driveway that doesn't exit onto the alley, you don't pay as much as someone that their garage exits on the alley. If you have a corner lot that doesn't have alley access. So it's not a strict, the cost of your home or the EAV of your home. That's why there's part of the cost of the process is there's an actual analysis that goes through, because you could challenge, there's a challenge process where you can challenge your assessment and say it's unfair, the amount that I'm being assessed is not fair compared to my neighbors. There is a process to challenge it, so there has to be a basis as an estimate, the increase in value of your property for it. So it's not a straight line. We can't tell people if you have a 30-foot lot or if you have a house that's worth $250,000, how much you're gonna pay.
Yeah.
It's based on the cost of the whole project spread among all the property owners. So it's a very complicated process to spread the roll, so that helps.
Generally speaking, though, it's kind of based on your frontage foot. So if you have a larger frontage, you're gonna pay a bigger percentage. And then, as Mike said, then they'll spread the roll and make any adjustments.
So
I just wanted to close the loop. I think I understand that, there are limited options for providing financial assistance, but I just want to, keep an open mind about trying to find equity in this effort, and making sure that, I think Trustee Gilhooly has made this point before, that the people with the most money get push to the front of the line to get their alleys fixed. So I don't know what the answer is, but whether or not a person votes on their block to have the alleys done or not, I think there should be some consideration for, we're already doing this referendum to fix our streets. Alleys may or may not sweeten the deal for people, right? Like, those people are still getting taxed on the alleys, whether or not they want them or not. And so I don't think it's always gonna be a sweetener for every voter.
Well, and to that point, I don't know if this is, the way we're going about this right now, it seems like this is the same thing we had been doing for years. The referendum would give us 900,000 to put towards it with the way that. 800,000. We had money to put towards it before, but we weren't having the residents come forward with it. The petitions kept being voted down. I think if we do this, there should be a cost sharing, but at the same time, I wonder how successful the alley portion of this program will be.
I think the big difference from what we've done in the past is, in the past, if an alley got voted for, it petitioned, it got voted for, there wasn't a dedicated alley fund on the side ready to fund that. The village made it work, but they weren't, we weren't able to leverage any outside funding sources because there were no alleys programmed for. Like, the MWD called and said, well, why aren't you guys applying for alleys? Why every year? Well, we don't know which alleys are gonna be built, or, if there's people on board. If we can start generating an alley fund and some interest in getting some of these, special high priority alleys going and constructed and start to leverage some of this funding, the hope would be that between that and then having a more enticing cost split rather than 80-20, 50-50, that we can start getting a list of alleys or residents on board that they want their alley done, and we can start applying for those grants.
And maybe that's the enticing part, the 50-50, but to the point of the, prioritizing which alleys, it really isn't up to us, right? If the residents are gonna go vote, and, we're saying you need 51%, so does that high priority alley get voted through? It's challenging how we go about this here.
Well, I think, my point was trying to make earlier is with the 51, we can rely on petitions coming forward from certain blocks, but if there's other blocks that are obvious or available because there's a redevelopment, we don't have to say, well, that block's got to come forward with the petition. If we have a redevelopment or a TIF project or something else, those could be the first ones that happen, going forward, assuming that there's some. They would not be necessarily getting a full 50-50 match because if there's a redevelopment, we requiring as part of the redevelopment to have a property owner pay more than 50%, that type of thing. We could pick those alleys, going forward as there's construction. And I'm talking specifically mostly the properties that border commercial and residential alleys, going forward. So it could be a hybrid of those alleys versus the ones coming forward with petitions. And again, if the incentive of 50-50 versus, 80-20 is not enough, then if we don't have them coming forward, the board might just have to make decisions about, do we, oppose special assessments and go forward so we make use of the funds that we have available for alleys. And then, to Dan's point, in the past, I think what we've done is, and Doug can correct me, we take some money out of the garbage fund because we know that a lot of the damage to the alleys is caused by the garbage trucks, the heavy trucks coming by every week and 3 trucks coming by, and that's a lot of it. So we were trying to tie that to some of that money. We'd put aside some money each year from the garbage fund towards that, but we haven't been doing that. We've been using that for other areas because we haven't had petitions come forward. But if we have a dedicated source, as we've learned with parks and other improvements in our planning, if we have funds available and matches, we're more likely to be able to get the MWRD and even the member initiatives from, federal and state legislators where we can leverage their grants into bigger projects if they know we have an alley paving program going forward. We can specifically point to, if you give us a grant or a line item on the budget, we can leverage it to do this, this, and this. I think it helps our chances of getting more alleys done faster.
If we were to go with the 50/50 cost split, do we have a sense of what that would cost for a resident on a 50-foot lot?
I believe, just from when residents petitioned previously, so this number's probably a year old. I think with the 50/50 cost split, you're probably looking at $10,000 for a 50-foot lot, and then they would have the option to spread that over 10 years, as Mike said, with an interest, so.
Okay, that might be important information to include in the education.
Yes, and that's why we're looking for ideally a direction one way or the other, so that we can work with Metro Strategies, that they're gonna be critical with this to help educate, not only on the streets, you know, kind of the main portion of this, but the alleys maybe specifically, and how that gets communicated.
When
the
you just did
timelines
that
and
rough
everything.
math, I assumed that you, I mean, we had to have figures as to approximately how much per frontage foot an alley costs someone, so I mean, like.
Correct, that wasn't off the top of my head.
No,
That was,
no.
I believe from previous figures.
Yeah, so I mean, like, you know, is it $100 per frontage foot or whatever that we could figure, or like how much typically per frontage foot, so a 30-foot lot, 50-foot lot, 75-foot lot type thing, if we could break it down to a typical, I don't know if that would be more helpful as part of the, if like people knew that, because if you put it out there as a 50-foot lot or a 30-foot lot or a 75-foot lot, or, you know, could we just say a per frontage foot typical cost based on most recent past experience? It's this, typically, it's this much per frontage foot on average, knowing.
Yes, and that's what goes in with every petition. When residents do bring it forward and vote, we provide a, 25-foot, 50-foot cost estimate.
And in, to Trustee Ketchmark's point, and I think Trustee Hendricks was making this point earlier in the conversation, the cost is one factor, and it's a significant factor, but it also seems like there's this burden of the special assessment process and coming forward with the petitions and essentially creating this political process on your block and, trying to reach consensus with their neighbors. And that's still going to be challenging even with the higher cross threshold. So this would, I think, be a bit of an experiment for us. Does the cost alone is that the hurdle for people? And do we see a significant spike in investment? Or if we do not, and I think President Garvey, you were suggesting this, then in the future the board might have to consider a more aggressive financing structure if they want to get this done, because I do think it's quite possible. My fellow board members were educating me about the special assessment process just now, and it seems pretty daunting to try to confront that on my block before I even get to the question of, can my family afford this additional cost, right? So perhaps it's worth pursuing and answering that question. Does the changing the cost share, is that enough? Or if this is a priority, do we need more outside the box aggressive approaches?
I think we start with this, but the process we have in the past, petitions coming forward, and the hybrid of that versus the alleys that are obviously ripe for that because of redevelopment or other things, and then we work our way down from there. But I guess maybe to just, again, is there anyone that's in favor of option one, where it's just fully funded, no cost sharing? I mean, again, I'm trying to do my job of narrowing the issue, so I didn't sense.
I do like option one.
Okay, so there is there?
I think that there's.
You
I
think it's easier
option
to
two
sell? Yeah.
It's very restrictive. I think that, to your point, people aren't doing it now, and I'm not sure that that change in cost is going to be enough.
Okay. Is there anyone else that is strongly considering option one, or could choose option one over option two, or?
I'm borderline on it because that's a really good point, is that, right, if that's the same model that we're essentially using today, and we have not seen, it's been years since we've had really any significant number improved.
The other,
submitted.
the other,
Option one is not what we're doing today.
No, I know. I'm saying, sorry. but
with the cost share,
With the
yeah,
cost share.
that we haven't had a lot of success, and we haven't had one since 2018. The main benefit with option one is it gives the most flexibility. It eliminates the petition and that headache, the special assessment, and allows the village to just say, okay, what alleys need it the most, and just tackle them. Obviously, there's a significant downside in the term for the program. Obviously, you're almost doubling it, so that's kind of the balance that we're trying to.
And as you said too, though, as there are more and more grants available, you know, I think we've been very successful in winning those, right, being awarded those, that, you know, I don't know, you know, if those are gonna keep on coming, but I think it's another option to help cut those years down a little bit.
It would help to leverage some of the grant funding, because you don't have to rely on, okay, well, this alley over here, and this alley over here, and this alley over here have filled out petitions, and there are next ones up. By just having, hey, the village has this fund to spend how it deems fit, and we have an opportunity to get some additional costs here, we're gonna move over here and tackle those alleys, because we can leverage the funding the best. It does provide a more flexibility.
Could there be a process in conjunction with, I'm thinking of the petitions, right? And if we go with option one, but you allow petitions for people to submit if their alley is particularly in need, right? If they get enough of their neighbors to say, you know, here's why we think ours should be prioritized and why, and I mean, you can at least give something to review. Because I know there are some where, you know, people have to like drive up and over just to get in their garage because it's been, you know, graded so much. But I don't know, maybe we could kind of incorporate both.
I would just think you'd get 100, that would be the easiest petition to pass on your block. I think you get 100% support that, you know, our alley's the worst, it needs
I
it.
mean, we'd have to put in all the supporting, you know, they'd have to include all the supporting documentation, but just could be.
And I
policy.
completely understand the point. I would just, and not to beat a dead horse, there is a difference between option two and the current system. It's a 50% match versus a 80% match
Right,
before,
I
so.
understand.
But I'm just saying, then the obvious thing about option one might be harder to pass, just because there is the people who have paid for their alley going forward. And again, I don't want to state the obvious, the people who have paid for their alley are less likely to vote for option one if all the funds that they approve in a referendum are going to be used to pave 100% of someone's alley when they paid 80%. I'm just,
Can I ask how many people that is? How many people have paid for their alleys? How many alleys don't need improvement at the moment?
Yeah.
I believe.
yeah, Derek, if you could come up to the microphone. No, Derek, you've
Derek's
got
been
the
around a little
historical
longer than I
knowledge,
have,
so.
So Derek could help you out there.
Put it in perspective.
83%.
Started in 2000. We've done about 30 special assessment alleys since 2000 to 2018. So it was actually pretty popular. And the cost, I heard the average cost. Our current cost per frontage foot is about $400. So $400 per front foot by 50. The residents were being told the estimate was about 20 grand. With this new one, and I need to do the math, it's probably about 12 grand is what we're reducing it for a 50-foot lot. South side 50-foot lots are common. They're 30 and 40 foot up on the north end of town is very common too. So we can put some more information together. Actually, I want to offer you this is at the board meeting, the next board meeting, that's when the village has to agree to the language for the ordinance. This is our first discussion with you. What the village, what we need to do as the board and staff is come together and at least have answers whether it is cost sharing or not cost sharing, because we'll put some public education, but even they're gonna ask questions and we have to have that answer, because we won't look trustworthy if we say we're not sure if there's a cost share. But we don't need that tonight, so I wanna kinda relieve a little of the burden on the discussion. And I get there's a lot of detail that'll go into this program. The fact is, and Dan, can you go to the slide where we talked about how we prioritize, or whoever's got the control?
While this slide is up, isn't it safe to say, Derek, that concrete or green alleys is about 15.8% of our total alley So those are those would be the people that adopted or approved a special assessment. So you're talking about 15% of the alleys have been paid for.
And we can look at the costs. We've had, and I'm doing this by memory, I'm gonna say since 2018, we've had 6 to 8 petitions. So there's still interest in the program. We typically do a estimate of cost. We have a meeting, public meeting, provide them with information. It's always the cost. They're all happy with how long it'll take. They understand the final product. It's the cost. By knocking it from 20 to approximately 12, we can come back with even firmer numbers in 2 weeks, but you're bringing it back to when these alleys were starting to be passed is what I'm wondering, when people were more interested in these alleys. And I'll address a couple things. I know how long this is. No village in the area is gonna raise $114 million in a quick time. It's gonna, no matter what we come up with, it's gonna be a while. These residents, not everybody benefits from their alley. I've always felt that it makes sense for there to be some sort of cost share for the residents, because they primarily, when your alley's improved, you're the one that primarily benefits, not your neighbors 3 blocks away. Streets are a more general type of a program. So what we were looking for tonight, if this helps the conversation, is just some general direction, cost share, not cost share, because at some point, when the board passes this ordinance, and I think the staff is gonna go through and talk about, just give an outline for outreach. By August or September, we'll need an answer, so, cause we'll be putting some information out, but we'll also be showing up at farmers markets and answering questions, and we can't say we don't know about this program, we'll lose their trust, was our concern as staff, so.
That time, that timetable is helpful, because I knew that we didn't have to make a decision on this tonight. I did push for the decision earlier about the ballot language, because I knew we needed that, but, and Trustee Kaluzny could not be here tonight, but I know she said she wasn't necessarily gonna be listening live tonight, but she was gonna go back and listen and watch, and I know she read the packet. And Trustee Goulart, you might have a problem at the meeting on the 27th?
Correct.
Okay, is anyone else gonna not likely be here on July 27th? Okay. And Trustee Goulart, will you be unavailable? You're out of town for work, but will you be unavailable? Well, you could always watch the board meeting or chime in and communicate from there. We don't necessarily have to make a decision on the 27th, but we could definitely come back with, I think the board has generated a lot of questions. Yeah. And maybe there could be more information to come back that would help us towards, because I don't know that I want to push for trying to get an exact consensus on cost sharing versus not cost sharing, but maybe with some more information, and we talk about this again on the 27th.
I think so, and I'd just like to share, we put together just an option for the board to consider to begin a conversation, but if we do go with the cost split, I think the village will always reserve the right to prioritize the alleys. As we've said, if we have a big development come in, it's got 1/3 of the frontage of the block, you might want to make sure you get that one then. Commercial alleys might take a priority. They have heavier use, they wear out, the stone needs to be regraded much quicker. We did talk about conditions of alleys, I heard Dan addressing it. Problem is, when PW regrades the alleys, they're all in good shape on day one, but they quickly deteriorate. So where streets they deteriorate kind of slowly over time, alleys sort of have peaks and valleys every 3 to 4 months, however often. So condition can be something. It's probably lower down on the list. I would look at mainly the ones that have significant drainage problems that maybe are impacting private properties, flooding a lot of garages out. Maybe that condition would make you prioritize. And then our thought was, and it doesn't sound maybe like the board's completely in agreement, but there are gonna be people interested in, we thought it would be the order of petitions that were as they came in. I think out of those 6, 7, or 8 that came in over the last 6 or 7 years, I have a feeling you'll see them come back in if they found out their cost share was about 60% of what was presented to them. And again, open for discussion, but those are our thoughts.
Thank you, Derek. So, I don't know if we're gonna make much more progress. Is there any, can we come back with more information, let the board digest this, let trustee Kaluzny chime in, and then talk about this again on the 27th?
Yes.
But we got the language on the ballot question down, and we don't want to hamstring the board, the staff on the education campaign, but we still have time, so. Okay.
Right, all I was gonna share was understanding that we don't know exactly yet what the public outreach information content will be. That's okay for tonight. Really, we've talked quite a bit internally, and we're picking the brain of Metro Strategies. They're the experts at this. We don't think it makes a whole lot of sense anyways to start public education so much now. People forget. Attention span is not perhaps enough to, if we advertise, if we get a lot of information out now, by November, is that still going to be withheld? So this is what we as a staff were thinking about, is starting next month into September, doing some webpage updates, social media posts in-house, working with Metro Strategies for that as well. Doing some community pop-up events at our farmers market, perhaps at the concerts on Grand. Newsletter articles in our quarterly newspaper, and newsletter, I should say. In October, we were thinking about a month before the referendum, actually hosting an open house here at Village Hall, where we'd have all of us smiley faces here, answering questions and so forth. Again, also in October, really hit hard on the web pages, social medias, and in October, do a mailing sent to every Brookfield address that would be informational. Obviously, we're all working backwards towards November 2nd, or I'm sorry, November 3rd, which is Election Day. We would do another social media post the day before.
Is it helpful to include board members in those community pop-ups?
Sure. Come on, absolutely.
Let us know.
Yes, let us know.
Cap.
Okay,
Oh, I think we've already been through all this.
yeah.
Ordinance next meeting on the question, which we've already discussed. We'll work with Metro Strategies. We already talked about these things.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you for all the work, everyone. I know it's been a very time-consuming process, but it's very important, so thank you. Moving on to the last item, a status report and direction on the Des Plaines River Bike Path South Extension Project. Again,
Yes, thank you, President Garvey. We're hopeful this will not take 100 years to implement a bike trail. You may think it does, it will, but I guarantee you it won't. Real quick, it's been a while, it's been since I believe 2024 that the last update the board received from us, from staff. So we thought this would be a good meeting and good discussion. We're at a decision point, some critical issues finally with this project that we thought this would be a good time to come. So real quick, I thought it'd be helpful. It's been a long time since this has been before the board. There might be some confusion as to why are we talking about this, or what is this trail? I'm not originally from this area, so I'm really not an expert on the Des Plaines River Trail. Perhaps some of you are. But right now, starting at, this is the village, north-south. This is the north. Here comes the existing paved bike trail. This is Maple Avenue in LaGrange, North Riverside. Crosses Maple, comes on down. Again, this is all here paved now. Then it kind of comes past 26th Street. There's a little spur that goes on, the main trail goes east on 26th to First Avenue. There is a small section of the trail that meanders back down here behind Cantata. Then it sort of peters out and dead ends here. I'm not sure if that's improved or not, or if that's gravel, but the trail just sort of ends there. The main part of the trail continues east on 26th Street, then goes south on First Avenue along the west side of the right-of-way. And this again is a 8 to 10 foot wide trail, regulation size for a recreation path of this sort. It goes south to this is Washington, it's just south of Washington, then it kind of dies again. Again, I'm not sure why this path was put in this way. There is no connection point between the trail here and where the trail continues a little bit. I'll get to a second in the south, but the main part of the trail here in Lyons starts up again here, just north of Ogden Avenue, continues south, hooks back up along the river, and the trail continues. So the main impetus, I believe, by the Cook County Forest Preserve for doing this project is to try to fill in, everywhere you see this yellow line, this is a new trail where no connection exists. You can go south, where this ends just south of Washington, there is a sidewalk, very narrow sidewalk, and is right next to the right-of-way. First Avenue, obviously, you all know, is a 4-lane IDOT highway. It's not very safe. It's not very welcoming, but it runs, the sidewalk does continue to run, I believe, all the way to Ogden. Whoops, I'm sorry. But it's not by any means a standardized path. So I think what the county is trying to do is, and I'll get into this in a second, so the trail ends now just south of Washington. What this project would do is, this is in the village of Riverside, build a new trail, standard size, 10 feet wide, asphalt, safely protected from the First Avenue right-of-way, down to about Wabansie Street in Riverside. There is an issue, I believe, with the railroad bridge here. They can't put, the reason they, and I'm just gonna tell you, this was about a year delay, waiting for the village of Riverside and the Cook County Forest Preserve to come up with an agreeable route here through a mixture of Riverside right-of-way and Cook County right-of-way. But the reason being is that there just isn't the right-of-way without doing major changes and improvements to this railroad abutment that have to rebuild it, which was not in the cards. So anyways, the path would go south to Wabansie, go west, and then go south along a small sliver of Cook County Forest Preserve property, hooking back up again on First Avenue. A new trail would be installed here on the west side, going to Ogden Avenue. Then there would be a crossing on the north side of Ogden across First Avenue. This is all existing right now, to an existing path. Then when you get into the village of Lyons, this red or orange would be a new path that would be constructed on easements behind existing village businesses. Again, this is not in Brookfield, so we've been kind of at the request and the mercy of how fast Lyons and the county work with that. Then there's a small area here, I guess, where there's an existing path that would hook up to, again, a new path in Lyons on right away that they're gonna acquire through, or access through easements, hooking up to an existing path here, just north of Ogden, cross Ogden, and as I said before, then hook up to the main trunk down here. So that's the trail. Is there any questions? Do you all know this already?
So a few questions on that. We've talked about this a little bit. In particular, where the path leaves First Avenue and goes down Wabansie, a railroad bridge abutment, I'm picturing nothing there until actually you get back to First Avenue. Was that what it was, or was there some other issue?
Why does it go to Wabansie and not just First Avenue?
Because there's a couple issues. They chose to jog down, west on Wabansie or Wabansie. It's, there's some more tree impacts if we stay along the right-of-way, because they would push it further away from the road than the sidewalk. There's also a ditch along there too, so they'd have to have it'd be up on posts. It's a more expensive section of path. So they ran down Wabansie as the south right-of-way. The south parkway is fairly open. And then the part that runs north, that, just to be clear, that's not in that alley. That's about 20 to 30 feet east of that alley, which is not within Brookfield at that
Okay.
time. So
Won't bikers still continue down First Avenue and not jog over?
I don't think there'll be a path there for them to.
Well, won't the sidewalk still be there?
That's a good question. I have to actually, is there a sidewalk there?
Yeah, there is a sidewalk there. It's very narrow, as Tim said. And,
Yeah.
I mean, we can't, I mean,
It's probably, that's a good point, and we should ask them to remove that then. We don't want bikes going down a 5-foot wide
Well,
sidewalk.
what about pedestrians, though? People do walk that way. I mean, are they now gonna
You could put a bollards up
walk
and
the,
say no bicycles.
down
That's a good
Wabansie? I
idea.
mean, I don't know. I mean, I don't know what they plan on that, but it seems like if that walkway's left there, people just continue on that walkway. on Wabansie, it's going to be in the parkway then, correct? Not on the,
No, it'll be a trail.
right,
Yep.
in the parkway.
It's in the parkway. It's
Right,
south
not
of
on the
curb.
street.
He's asking if it's in the
Yeah,
street.
one of the
I
debates
think.
we had was to make it easier and cheaper. We thought there'd be a striped lane on the roadway.
Right, it's
That-
pretty narrow for that.
That's what Riverside said.
Also, when they were out, well, I don't know if that was earlier this year or late last year, it seemed like it was more in the middle of that block, Wabansie. So where they seemed to be marking it off was not as far west as this is showing. Did they change what they were looking at? Because, boy, they had dozens of people out there, and they were kind of in the middle of Wabansie.
Where it goes south, are you?
So
are you
where
referring-
171 is right there? No, right there. That's where it looked like they were gonna head back to First Avenue. Now they moved it farther west.
Yeah, no, and I'm not sure what you saw marked out, but that was a few years ago that they walked. They initially wanted to do the alley, and I told them I didn't think Brookfield was gonna be in
No.
favor of it being down the alley. And I think at that point, that's when they moved it. Again, it's ballpark 30-foot. They chose a route through there. It's not necessarily as straight as it looks. They're trying to avoid impacts to trees as they go through that
Mhm.
wooded area.
Okay.
All right, so I think that was helpful. I think we're more familiar with the route now, but.
Okay. So, a lot of this I just talked about. This project obviously involves 5 governmental entities: the Village of Brookfield, Cook County Forest Preserve, and the villages of Riverside and Lyons. So you can imagine with all these parties, there are different challenges and issues and people that have to get approval from. The village was awarded a Service Transportation Program grant back in 2017, STP. It's important to note that this will fund 80% of what we've done so far. And where we are right now is in phase 1 engineering. We are planning on, I think the group is planning on applying, and we're pretty hopeful and optimistic that we will eventually seek, or actually achieve funding for phase 2 of STP. That would pay the 80% of the phase 2 cost. In 2019, the village agreed, we are the lead agency of this project. And the parties jointly agreed back around 2017 or 2018, maybe 2019. Ciorba Engineering is the lead engineer, and we've been working with them diligently for these past 6 years or so. Really, as the village is concerned, which is really all we're concerned about, is what's in Brookfield. And the main issue for us and the main interest for the village is how are we going to build a path and where on 31st Street, and how it will connect to the regional trail, how it will connect to the zoo, and so forth. It has been decided that the path would be located on the south side of 31st Street, beginning at Prairie, heading, if you're at Prairie looking east, heading east on the south side of the roadway, adjacent to the zoo. As we just saw, the path travels south. Once it leaves the village limits, then it's up to the village of Riverside to decide what they want to do with that trail, but ultimately what the goal would be, or one option would be, is to hook up with the major trunk trail at First Avenue. We've already talked about that part. So, key decision points, and then I'll kick it over to Derek for the village. On 31st Street, do we want the trail to only run from Prairie to McCormick, and I'll have a map that shows where that is in a second. Should the path continue east to basically from Prairie to our village limits, just basically east of Gulfview, I believe about 300 feet. Obviously, there's an additional cost to the village and so forth, maintenance responsibilities. And if we do that, it's unknown at this point. I think the village of Riverside, understandably so, is waiting to hear what we think, what we decide, before they decide whether they would fund their portion of the path east of, on their western village limits to basically First Avenue. And I'll turn it over to Derek.
Okay, thanks for the background, Tim. So we're here, Tim and I meet monthly with the entire group for progress updates with the villages and Cook County Forest Preserve. And at this point, the design is in a conceptually final stage, and they've asked all of us to go back, meet with the boards, give them an update on the costs, and really what they're looking for is the boards to reaffirm direction as far as their cost sharing. And that's what we're here tonight is, on 31st Street, there are a couple sections of bike path, and we want to talk about the village's cost sharing for each. For any of these projects to go through all the villages for the various sections, we all anticipate being able to get a federal grant that'll cover 80% of the costs. Local share is going to be, 20% will be considered the local share. Tonight, we're just looking for a commitment to each section. We'll describe those in a minute here, to the local share. I want to state that the village is committing to the local share, but that doesn't mean we don't go out and look for other types of grants. We're probably going to get a federal grant for the 80%. You can't match federal funds with federal funds, so we can't go get a second federal grant for our local share, but Invest in Cook, as an example, is not a federally funded grant, so we may be able to get some additional Invest in Cook funds in the future to help reduce our 20% local share.
Derek, on that point, is it federal grant? What about, community-funded projects through like Congress? Is that considered a
A lot
grant?
of those are state grants. I mean, it's all whether it comes from the federal, but the community funded, I believe that might be a state grant.
But like what we got from Congressman Garcia.
The
for
federal
instance.
earmarks, yeah.
Yeah.
Those
And
are
we'd
co-
have, they're individual, it's where the funding comes. Some of those,
Sure.
if they get federal funding and then distribute it, that could still be federal funding. But
Okay.
some of those are state funding, and we could use to offset our local share.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, yeah. Can you, actually, you can stay here, I'll go through the, so we'll talk about the first section, which has always been the priority section for Brookfield, and that's, again, we're on 31st Street from Prairie up to McCormick. And what do we get by installing that section of path? We get a connection. There'd be a crossing at McCormick, it's currently proposed, to get you to the north side of 31st Street. That gives you access going north on McCormick up to the main Des Plaines River Trail. There's also a zoo bike entrance, which is located at the northeast corner of 31st and McCormick. So it does give us, anyone from Brookfield, access to that bike entrance. Total cost of that. Yeah, there's I haven't went back into that, actually, yes, there's it would be a beacon, and they're looking at a similar crossing, not the exact same as you may be familiar further west on 31st Street in Westchester. There's a similar type of bike path crossing with the light.
Between LaGrange Road and Wolf there, yeah.
Yes.
That's actually
Yes.
a really good spot for that, because there's a bus stop on the south side, right there.
Yeah.
And there's no safe way to cross there,
Yeah.
but that would be great.
So that's the priority. I mean, that Brookfield has since this was initiated, Brookfield wanted this access. Total cost is about 4.1 million. Village share is 820,000. We're looking to reaffirm that the board would, I guess, is in for the cost for the local share to continue with this additional work. With a local share of 820, again, that doesn't mean you don't go out and look for additional funding, but that's the 20% share right now. And we don't have to pause now. Let's go to the next slide if we could, Tim, one more. And then, of course, the next section is from McCormick Avenue to the East Village limit. So just for clarity, sometimes it's referred to as Gulfview Avenue. Our village limit's about 300 feet east of Gulfview Avenue. So for that section, it does provide additional connectivity to the First Avenue Trail if we install that, because Riverside would install their portion. If we choose to fund ours, the premise is that Riverside would fund the additional section that runs the First Avenue. why it may not be as big a priority for Brookfield is we already have connectivity to First Avenue Trail. We have it on Washington Avenue. We have bike lanes on Washington. You go due east, you hit the First Avenue Trail. And actually, if we install that first section of path on 31st Street, you would have connection to that Des Plaines River Trail going north, but it also goes over to First Avenue via 26th Street. So it's whether you want to fund this additional connectivity. Cost is $3.1 million. Village shares about $624,000. Go to the next. This is a slide, yeah, we don't need to spend a lot. Let's look at Riverside real quick. Gives you an idea on that chart, Tim. So you can see that their cost is significantly less, and in our discussions, they've indicated they would likely follow whatever approach Brookfield took for the funding. Next slide, please. So we've summarized these, and let me see, is the path to Brookfield? Yeah, I think we've touched on these. I guess we'll get to recommendations. I think since we started, we're looking for, we are looking for it to be a priority for the village to fund the path from Prairie to McCormick.
Yeah, and I mean, this process has been going on so long, I'm not sure how much this current board has addressed it. Is there anyone on this board that is not in favor of the Prairie to McCormick stretch? We're so far into this with funding and matches, but is there clear support from the board to clearly proceed with us with the path from Prairie to McCormick?
Yes.
Getting yes from, and Derek, just a quick point, I mean, is that, I guess, the route, I'm trying to think now, the bridge on the north side is wider at 31st going over the creek.
On the
But-
south side has a 10-foot concrete sidewalk or path. It's
The north
south
side, the south side has the wider part.
Yes.
So would that be just utilized, or is there actually improvements that have to go there, or is that already built
No,
into it?
that's
Part of the reason
one
why?
of the main reasons why the south side is being considered through there and
Okay.
chosen.
Okay, so there's clear board support to move forward with our commitment to the Prairie to McCormick stretch, okay?
Thank you. And then talking to staff, our thought is that from McCormick to First Avenue, while we think the bike path is a good idea there, we think that it has more regional benefit. And our suggestion is that the village board, I think we go back to Cook County and ask them to fund that section of the path. It has a regional benefit. If they want to come back and say we derive some small portion of the benefit, we can talk about that. But it doesn't seem like Brookfield would be responsible for 20% of those costs, since we get the main benefits of connectivity to the trails just by going to McCormick.
All right, so I guess that's the next question. I mean, and Derek, I appreciate explaining that we have access to the connectivity through the other routes, and I don't know, whenever I've talked to a lot of people about this, I mean, why the zoo isn't more on board on this, or I know why they're not more on board, they rather, it's the same thing, if we spend the money here, we can't spend it somewhere else. If the zoo spends their money on this, they can't spend it somewhere else, but it seems like the county and the Forest Preserve District would receive the greatest benefit of the stretch from McCormick to the village limits, so.
And I did neglect to say one thing. So one thing that Tim and I have run into is we were wondering why the county, the Forest Preserve wasn't interested in funding this 31st Street path. And they look at it more as a connector path, not part of their main trail like the First Avenue. And that's fine. But our interest for the connectivity in this connector path really ends at McCormick. After that, it provides benefit somewhat to Brookfield residents, but provides benefit to everybody else using that trail system. While we derive the main benefit for that west section of trail, I think everybody shares equally in the benefit of the east section of the trail.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree that the Brookfield residents would not significantly benefit from that final connection to city limits. I mean, Riverside is a very popular destination for people walking and biking. So Brookfield residents are traveling to Riverside and for recreation and shopping and restaurants. And this would be a much safer connection than what exists currently. The Washington Avenue bike lanes are an improvement, but it's lines on a street. It's not a protected facility. It's not an off-street facility. Lots of people are not comfortable riding their bike next to traffic, which on that street can often be high speed. And then also, I mean, when Riverside residents are coming to Brookfield, you know, they have the potential to spend money and support our businesses. So if it makes it easier for people to access the village, I think there's an added benefit of that connection. The cost difference is, you know, we're talking about $200,000, right? If we go to McCormick, it's $624. If you go all the way to village limits,
Those are not cumulative, it
Yeah.
would be a total, it's an additional, I think it was it's $820, and
Yeah.
maybe that's what you're saying, maybe I
Yeah.
misunderstood you, it's an additional $624 to.
additional $624. Yeah. I personally like the idea of going to village limits and including that segment in the study, and then pursuing every funding opportunity we can for external funding for future phases, phase 2 and construction. And my concern is that, you know, this has been a priority since the active transportation plan in 2017. I know, and Cycle Brookfield, since that organization was established, they'll tell you that this connection was their top priority. And I know that our staff, with your consultant support, have worked so hard and really stepped up into this convening role to try to advance this complicated projects because of the multiple jurisdictions involved. So I think we're all eager to complete the phase 1 so that we can get closer to construction. When we say complete the phase 1, I would say complete the phase 1 would and should include that the connection all the way to city limits and stepping up to the extent that we can for the the portions of the corridor that are in our village.
And I didn't state my request clearly enough, I can tell. The phase 1 is going to proceed with the connection all the way to First Avenue. It's whether or not, they're now asking for positions on village funding. And I think I agree with what you said, maybe a little different tactic, but we should pursue as much outside funding as we can. That's what I'm suggesting is our position be that this is regional, and we'd like the Forest Preserve to fund it versus the alternate is right now they're looking at Brookfield to fund that entire portion to 624, and I'm suggesting I don't find that reasonable since it's regional benefits. So it's not whether it gets constructed, it's our position on funding, and it may well end up being in an initial position on funding because we'll see how discussions go with them. But
And that's, because that's why I was misunderstanding. So we're not talking about committing to doing the phase 1 engineering to determine it's actually us committing to paying for the stretch from McCormick to the village limits is what?
It would be, they're looking for the funding for phase 2 and phase 3 engineering and construction. They usually define that during the phase 1 report, and that's the stage we're at. So that entire section has been studied, estimate, and it will be part of the phase 1 report. This is really just a discussion on our position that we go back to the group with as far as will Brookfield entirely fund that, partially fund, entirely fund the whole length within the village limits, entirely fund from just Prairie to McCormick, and what's our position on from McCormick to the East Village limit.
And if there was someone seeking funding for that stretch that we're talking about, I mean, the lead agency wouldn't Cook County have more, I'm asking, would Cook County have more likelihood of saying we're receiving benefit from that, so, we're better to apply for a grant? I mean, they have, obviously, we're very well aware of their connections with the state and federal and county governments. I mean, wouldn't they be more likely to obtain if it all of a sudden became clear it was, if it's gonna get finished, the Cook County's gotta pay the lion's share of it, maybe there could be some contribution by the Village of Brookfield as opposed to us paying the lion's share of it, maybe we could pay a smaller share, but wouldn't Cook County be more likely to get the outside funding than we would?
We're hopeful, and just to support that, I think the board probably remembers that the phase one, there was just additional work that was brought on. There was a $300,000 extra, and Cook County Department of Transportation and Highways graciously agreed to fund the entire amount, not asking Brookfield or any of the other villages. So I think there's some real incentive. We've discussed this with the one guy has a lot of passion. I don't want to name him by name, but he's got a lot of passion for it. And yes, I think there is some incentive for them to, I would think they would help us try to find a way to fund the
I don't
section.
disagree with that, but to be a little bit of a wet blanket, and the county's been great, they've been a great partner for us, and most of them have been proponents of this. But there was a time a couple of years ago where we were this close, they were saying this 31st Street is not a priority for them. So I don't want to give the impression that they are eager to, I agree with Derek, but now, but there was a time where they didn't want to fund anything on 31st Street. They said that's not part of their network. I think as Derek, I want to make sure everybody understands that. This 31st Street, I understand why it's a priority for the village, but it was not a priority at first for Cook County. Their priority is getting people to First Avenue, and then going, as we already talked about, north and south on
But saying
First.
Cook County and what their stated desire or their stated interest, I mean, quite honestly, I don't see how they wouldn't think they would benefit from having people to be able to ride their bikes from Brookfield, North Brookfield, all the Brookfield, LaGrange Park, LaGrange down 31st to the north gate of the zoo.
To
which
their own zoo.
Right, so the fact that they publicly stated it's not a priority, maybe it was true, maybe it wasn't, maybe they thought that they saw momentum going, that someone else was gonna pay for it, so they could spend their money on something else. Again, I don't mean to be, what they stated their desire or their interest in was might not reflect what their actual interest is, and that's why.
Well, and to be clear, these weren't public, our meetings aren't public, I don't believe.
No.
These are staff.
No, I realize that, but why would they want to pay for it if they think someone else is going to pay for it?
That's good, that's right.
I hate to be cynical, but.
I think I started meeting on this when I was village president in 2015, and we were having the exact same discussion then in terms of the funding. And the point I was bringing up then, that there's regional benefit to this well beyond Brookfield. So the funding should be well beyond Brookfield for this. It's a good idea that it goes to First Avenue, absolutely. But there's regional benefit that there needs to be more contribution from others. I think we take it to McCormick and, see what someone else wants to do with the rest of it.
So support the path to the eastern limits, but we're looking for additional support financially.
Well, did you say to the eastern limits or to McCormick?
Well, I think it's a good idea that it goes to First Avenue, but I just don't think we should be funding it to, from McCormick to First Avenue or the village limits.
That's the direction we're looking for, and maybe this will give Trustee Whitehead a little comfort. No one's, well, you brought up a good point. We're not looking at not doing the rest of the study's well underway. It's probably 80% done on 31st Street, all up for the entire length. And that's gonna get completed. We're looking for a position for funding that we can discuss at the next meeting, and depending how the conversations go, we don't have the authority to say, well, just don't build that section. We'd come back to the board with whatever the financing options are presented to us. We're not looking at an option, to be clear, to just eliminate that from the phase one or from future projects. It's just more of, how do we go discuss financing with them? What's the board's position?
I appreciate that clarification, and it did help address the concern that I was raising. And to Trustee Ketchmark's point, I mean, saying that we want to fund McCormick doesn't mean that we don't think connecting to First Avenue is a good idea, right? My concern though is still like, this is an example of, there's trail assets all over the region where there's significant gaps because of these jurisdictional issues and people can't agree on cost and design, right? So as a result, we have a very disconnected trail network that makes it hard to travel long distances. And there's good reasons why the individual municipalities are reaching the conclusions that they reach. At the end of the day, the trail network is disconnected and not as valuable as it could be to everybody because of issues like this. So, and we've already talked about the timeline of how long and how hard the team has worked just over since you said 2015 to get us this point. So I hope, and I'm not getting the impression that your intent is to delay further, but I hope by furthering the funding discussions, we don't suggest that it's gonna reduce the urgency of the project or require another year of meetings, and I hope we can maintain the momentum that we've built and get this study across and settle those questions and not let these jurisdictional questions continue to bog down the advancement of the overall project.
But that's where I think probably each of these municipalities, jurisdictions is having the same discussion at some point that we are,
Yep.
and is looking for how it impacts their village. And that's why we have all these disconnected parts, but that's because this is a regional project, and it should be the county or the state in some way coming in to help pull this all together. It shouldn't be up to us. Look at the cost of this project. We have a lot of things we could do in town. McCormick is what, $4.1 million? Our share is,
820.
this is a lot of money.
And Trustee Ketchmark, just to clarify, because I don't know if Tim misunderstood you, you said that you were supportive of the Prairie to McCormick, but not to the village limits.
In terms of funding.
No,
Having
Funding.
somebody else
Funding.
fund it.
Yeah.
The funding.
Right,
So the
okay.
first part is what I think staff was recommending. We take it to McCormick, we do our cost share on the funding, which is still a substantial amount of money. I support the idea of it going to the village limits and continuing to First Avenue, but not us
At
funding
somebody
it.
else's
But would you be open to the possibility of us not fully funding the stretch from McCormick to the village limits, but if we were partner, if the zoo or some other, there could be some contribution from us?
Well, right now, what was being proposed would be a 20% contribution from us.
My understanding, if I'm hearing, correct me if I'm wrong, is I'm hearing from the board that the board supports the construction of the path from Prairie to First Avenue. As far
Is that
as.
yes from everyone? I think that's clear, yes, but you're
And
reading it correctly.
I think I'm hearing, again, for discussion, that the board supports funding its share, the local share to 20% from Prairie to McCormick. And then the second part of discussion is, I believe I'm hearing the board say that they would like us to seek out additional funding for the local share from others, whether it be other grant programs like Invest in Cook, whether it be through other regional entities that benefit, like the Cook County Forest Preserve, items like that.
From McCormick to the eastern limits.
From McCormick to the eastern limits.
Right.
That's what I heard.
I believe that's
Is that
what I.
fair reading of the board?
Yep.
Okay.
That's the consensus, that's really what we need.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess what I'm hearing is, without specifically saying it, the village of Riverside would, is open to this and just kind of waiting to see.
Well, so what we'll do, based on this direction tonight, we have a meeting probably coming up in a couple of weeks. We'll share this with the group. Riverside is an active participant in this. I believe they will probably agree with your consensus. I think they support in principle, for the same reasons you all have, the path from First to their western limits. I think they'll say they don't want to pay for it either. They want additional county support, but they were waiting to see what you guys
Okay.
would all say, and now we'll pass it on.
And maybe the power of us all combining all the entities
Yeah.
together, so, okay.
Yeah, and I think the county is gonna not be surprised by this. They've been at the table with us at every meeting, and that they're supportive of the concept of this. We'll just now have better ammunition to use when we talk to them again.
Okay.
So you've done, in terms of next steps, you've done the first bullet point. We will meet with the group in the County Forest Preserve District soon and tell them what the direction has been. We're guessing and hoping that this calendar year, Sierra will finish its phase 1. We're hoping that in 2028, 2029, we'll obtain funding for phase 2. And we're hoping that by 2030 would be about the earliest we could expect the path to be constructed. So, go team. Here we go.
It hasn't been for lack of effort on behalf of the village board, village staff, and other things. I mean, these issues, I mean, after you get on the board and you're involved in the stuff, you realize it does seem ridiculous to the public, it does seem laughable.
Yep.
Short of us paying for everything in full out of our pocket, this is the way it works. And
Yep.
the study about 31st and Maple and how to improve that, and people can't believe that it takes that long, but it does, and we don't make the rules, we just gotta work our way through them, and I applaud staff and the board and the engineers for sticking with it, because people can get frustrated and give up, and you hear there's no give up on the board, we want this, so.
Yeah, to point out, it has been long. It is frustrating for staff to try to move it along. There's many entities involved. It's a $900,000 phase 1, of which Brookfield shares about $45,000. Phase 1's not for just the path in Brookfield, but that's quite a bargain, $45,000, because this also, the phase 1 covered a study of the 31st Street and Maple intersection, so that's the positive to the project is we're getting quite a bit of bang for our buck.
Okay. Well, thank you for the information, the presentation, and, just, I mean, we'll hopefully more regular updates on this, hopefully there's more news to update, more decisions for the board to make, so. All right, thank you to everyone. Okay, that was the last item we had up for discussion. Once again, I'll open up, is there any public comment on this side? Any public comment on this side? Any need for executive session, Tim? Okay, at 9:26 PM, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn the committee of the whole meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion was made by trustee Gahuli, second by trustee Ketchmark. Roll call, please.
Trustee Ketchmark?
Aye.
Trustee Whitehead?
Aye.
Trustee Hendricks?
Aye.
Trustee Naramatsu?
Aye.
Trustee Gahuli?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Okay, we're adjourned at 9:26 PM. Thank you.
My daughter went downtown last night.
Yeah.
Took a picture of downtown just to take a picture of the sunset. That's so sweet. 16-year-olds, man, they have their ideas. Oh, that's so cool, though.
My wife and I were at a concert at Wrigley last night, and the weather was perfect. Tyler Childers, yeah. Yeah. I've had mixed experiences at the Wrigley venue, because like sometimes the acoustics with the wind, like the sound's really bad. But last night was like a perfect night, and our seats were pretty good, so it was like, because it wasn't, it like cooled down in the evening, and it was like one of those perfect Chicago evenings. Yeah. Well, we met two friends down there too. Yeah.
Excellent. We gave our kids this concert for Christmas.
Good night.